Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Anastasia Kinigopoulo. I am the Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art at the Currier Museum of Art. And we're just thrilled to open Embellish Me, works from the collection of Norma Canellas-Roth and William Roth. Thank you so much to our sponsors, and thank you so much to Bill Roth for lending these incredible works to the Currier. I know some of you joined us for the members tour this morning, but if you hadn't had a chance to see the exhibition yet, we will be keeping it open for about half an hour after this panel, so you'll have a chance to walk through and take a look at some of the art. And I really encourage you to do so. And please also join us for the opening celebration tomorrow evening. It's going to be a really fun night. It's going to be a boisterous opening, and we're looking forward to seeing you there. So Embellish Me centers on the work that came out of the pattern and decoration movement, or P&D. P&D emerged in the 1970s at a moment when conceptual art and minimalism were absolutely dominant in the American art world. Serious art was considered impersonal, stripped down, formal, and these movements were considered a logical progression of the Western art historical lineage, a canon. Serious art also meant art that was far away from nostalgia, from memory, from any sort of sentiment. Very often it meant art that obscured any traces of the artist's hands in favor of a cool formalism. And it was in this climate that the artists in this exhibition turned to color, to ornament, to repetition, to texture. They used materials that were associated with women's work, with the home, with the body, with non-Western cultures. And they embraced techniques such as quilting, mosaics, embroidery, even cake decorating. In doing so, they expanded the boundaries of what could be considered art in this country. And the impact of their efforts remains deeply felt in the contemporary art community to this day. The work in this exhibition crosses four major themes, which are domesticity and craft, travel and cross-cultural influence, pattern and the grid, and finally nostalgia and memory. And we'll be exploring some of these themes with the artists gathered here today. And we are so fortunate to have the artists on this panel with us today. So let me introduce Pat Lasch, John Torreano, Tony Robbin, Ned Smyth, and Joyce Kozloff. And I'll start the panel by asking, what were the stakes of what you were doing in the 1970s? What were the stakes?
What were the what?
The stakes of what you...
Well, I was working at a gallery called 112 Green Street, and everyone who showed there, Gordon Matta Clark, Richard known as Gene Heistein, were all minimal artists. And at a certain point, Holly wanted to open up her gallery on West Broadway. And so she invited us. I went. I met Bob Kushner. I had never known him before. I met Kim McConnell. I met Thomas Lanigan Schmidt. And everything that they were doing changed my idea of what art was. Because I was kind of shocked that they were painting on fabric and things like this. But on another level, I showed with Holly major column spaces and concrete 2x4s and things like that. And that got me into making public art around the country. So I did the first pieces in Battery Park City, Philadelphia, all over the country, Alaska. And at a certain point, Holly came to me and she says, I want 50% of what you make. And I called up Leo Castelli and I said, Leo, what do you charge for a commission? And he said, no, if one of my artists gets a commission, I show the work because I have all these pieces. I sell so much work out of the gallery. And so I went back to Holly and I said, you know, Holly, I can't give you 50%. I don't make 50% of the art. And so I left the gallery at that point.
Was there, I guess I'll ask this a different way. Did it feel like you were taking risks in making work like this in a time when minimalism was really the art of the day?
Yes. But it was really fun. It was a provocation. It was a deliberate provocation on our parts. And I just wanted to say that there wasn't only one pattern and decoration group. There were several. And I think the people on this stage represent several different communities. And the ideas that evolved in these different communities pretty much in the same time period, I'd say around 1970, 71, related, but we didn't necessarily know about one another for another 5 years, except the people who we were working very closely with. And, you know, walking through the show, I just made me very sad because so many of the ones that I remember and that I was close to are dead.
We're always being given the rules and regulations. What's permissible, what's hip, what's not hip. And I just felt that the rules and regulations didn't apply to me. I was interested in other things. I found friends who were interested in the same things. And our first exhibition together was 10 approaches to the decorative in
75.
Yeah, 74, I looked it up.
Oh, 74.
And this was the first time that we showed together. And I think we felt that we were a group and that we were a movement and that we could gain strength from each other's work. And that was the beginning. And it resulted in a very big spread in Art Forum by Jeff Perrone. And that really put us on the map. And there were a lot of little shows after that.
And that was a momentum that you continued by having what I can tell is a very close community of artists, even though it seems like there are pockets of artists in various cities moving through pattern in their work. I often hear of artists saying, oh, well, I knew that person. They were doing something because they were connected through a residency or a gallery, or I crossed paths. So it was really a nationwide network, in a sense.
Well, for me, going to Holly Solomon Gallery, I met Bob Kushner, I met Kim McConnell, I met Tommy Lanigan Schmidt, and their aesthetic kind of shocked me. What the heck are you guys doing with painting on fabric and sewing strips together? And Tommy Lanigan Schmidt was making stuff out of tinfoil. And, so it was really, for me, it was a way of kind of breaking loose from minimalism.
Sure.
My involvement was instituted by Ned because he thought I would be a good fit. I feel a little bit like an orphan of the pattern and decoration movement because I didn't understand the title. I was thinking, well, any artwork on the wall is a decorative thing in a sense. But once I got looking into what it was about, what I really connected to was exactly what Joyce was saying about. I came through the 70s and 80s anti-painting period, and as she said, there were the intensity of the minimalist and conceptualist and pop, I would include that, was a dogmatic way of being. And I was already doing things with gems and stuff that was being criticized a lot by my peers. And my feeling was, well, that's weird. There's Thomas Lanigan Schmidt, and there's, Rauschenberg with things falling on the floor. What's up with that? And what I realized was they were, it bothered them because I was putting them into a kind of formalist context, like the paintings were essentially formalist if they didn't have gems in them. But the gems to them was like putting a plastic earring on a fancy woman. You know what I mean? I was like, they didn't like that. And so all of the ideas about resisting the dogma, the dogma of that I just described. I mean, one time, a lot of times I've said to students, all of art from the cave paintings to the present, to an artist, all art is contemporary art. You can be influenced by any kind of visual phenomena and any kind of art, including outsider art, including African art, including Egyptian pot. You could okay, I like that image and make a painting. So that's what I liked about this set of artists, that they were rebelling against that.
Well, I didn't know these guys at all. I came in through working with other women, and Lucy Lippard had started this kind of loose group called the Ad Hoc Committee. And so I got to meet other women. And I was a student of Richard Serra's, and I also had a love affair with him. And yeah, I did. And he was a tough guy.
I'm impressed.
And but the thing that was interesting was the last time he came to my studio, I said, I want to do these paintings with thread because I wanted these lines, and I knew that there wasn't any other way I could get these lines. It was with thread. So he came, the last time he came to my studio and he said, he said, I told you not to do that. and he said, they're good. And he walked out and never came back to my studio. Close. He fell in love with Joan Jonas then. So the ad hoc committee was also just wonderful because I met other women, and can I say something about Louise Bourgeois? We were at a meeting once. There were about 30 women in my loft, and Jackie Windsor had said, well, all of us women should stop sleeping with our husbands and boyfriends until we can get a show. And so Louise, yeah, and Louise Bourgeois pipes up. I didn't know who she was, but there was this little old French woman there. She was about 65, and she said, I don't know what all you women are complaining about. She said in France the man was the dandy. We always supported them. And I went, who's that? And that was Louise Bourgeois. So, but the support of women was major to me. And I didn't know any of these guys. So I came at it from a very different...
But you should talk about AIR.
Yeah, and AIR is the first women's gallery that started. It opened in the fall of 1972. And from that ad hoc group, before even AIR opened, we had a 13-woman show that we rented our own space because women they weren't being shown in the galleries. There was Helen Frankenthaler, Louise Nevelson, and that's about all I can remember. I mean, we couldn't get a show. So in one sense, there was no risk because we weren't going to get any kind of commercial show. So we could do whatever the hell we wanted. And I wanted to work with thread, so I worked with thread, and it was great. And AIR formed out of the ad hoc group. People got together and said, let's show our own work. And that was how AIR blossomed. And I'll tell you, our openings were, we had hundreds of people at our openings. And it was jammed all the time. And these women, so many of them become really important women. And like Mary Gregoriadis, that's up in the show, if you get to see her work, she has Alzheimer's now. And Joyce and I are still alive. It's amazing we're not dead. But, I think of Jane Kaufman. She has died. And so many of the works were just so beautiful. And I hope you get to really look at some of the people that aren't with us any longer because they were magical and they started listening to their own hearts and their own beat. So, thank you.
Thank you. Ooh, that's a tough one to follow a question with.
My Louise Bourgeois' husband was on my dad's faculty at the Institute of Fine Arts. And we would go there, and she would take me into her studio, which was underneath they bought a building. And she would take me into the studio. This was long before spiders or anything like that. But again, for me, it was like eye-opening to kind of be in an artist's space and see kind of what they were doing.
And it also speaks to in some ways, the hegemony of what is printed about art and what it gets to the art news, as it were, as opposed to what's actually happening on the ground in the art world, what's happening in people's studios, to my mind at least. But I want to move on to sort of the notion of travel. And so many of you have been influenced by the pattern and ornamental traditions of cultures beyond Europe and beyond the United States. Many of you have traveled to the Middle East and to Japan. And I was hoping you could speak a little bit to what you were looking for and what you found in those traditions that you weren't able to find in European and American art and European and American decorative art traditions.
Is this on?
Go
ahead.
Push it right to your face. Put it in your mouth.
My family moved to Japan right after World War II, and I have some sense memories of that. And then a little bit later, we lived in Okinawa, and I definitely have memories of that. But I think more important to me was living in Tehran. I was in Tehran as a teenager, and we traveled around and had Persian carpets in our home. But everything you saw in Iran was patterned, whether it was the walls of a mosque or a picture frame with marquetry, or just a box, or the tiles on the wall, or the rugs on the floor. You're just saturated with pattern. And I think that set me up for the pattern and decoration movement. I want to say that I've subsequently looked at why pattern is so universal. From the beginning of human time to the present, all over the world, people make patterns and embellish the patterns with color and brocade and things of value. It's interesting to kind of think about that. It's more common, more ubiquitous than the human form. There are lots of cultures that don't permit your drawing of a face or a body, but do permit patterns, work with patterns. And I have my theories about that, but I'll let someone else speak.
Well, I want to, because several people in the last 24 hours have asked why we had this name. And what I remember, the group that I was part of, that Tony was part of, were having meetings in lofts. And, we had to have a name. And some people wanted to call it pattern painting. But there were other people who didn't have patterns in their work. And there were people who wanted to call it decoration, who were trying to make this wildly decorative work. But then there were some people who said, I don't like that, it doesn't fit me. So we ended up making this dual thing, pattern and decoration. And there are things that all of you said that I wanted to comment on.
Go ahead.
Tear us apart.
No, I don't want to tear you apart. I don't. When we're talking about how it all got started, with me it was feminism, like it was with Pat. But it began in Los Angeles, not New York. And that was happening in Los Angeles, and I went there as a faculty wife in 1970, and I met all these feminists, and we started organizing. And I was doing geometric abstraction, and I was a little apologetic about it because the women that I was around in California were doing this wild feminist art. And then I started thinking about the word decorative and where did it come from? And why was there such a prejudice against it? When I was in school, you would tremble if you got a critique and someone said the work was decorative.
Yeah.
So then the idea was to just embrace the word and make your work as decorative as possible and stop worrying about it. But it was a process for me over a period of several years to come to that and to embrace it and then to see how I could possibly incorporate it into what I was doing. And I joined the ad hoc committee when I came back to New York also.
No? Nah. I can't let you guys off that easy. I do want to return to this question, and in some ways this is a question for you, Joyce, and Tony, you talked a little bit about it, but your work engages with Islamic ornamentation so profoundly and in such an interesting way. And can you tell me a little bit more about what it was that drew you to those traditions specifically?
Yeah, I mentioned this morning that I feel a little apologetic about it because I've been accused of cultural appropriation more than once. I've been accused of cultural appropriation since the 70s, and I was naive. I thought it was an homage. I mean, I still feel it's an homage to things that I love, but there are people who feel that it belongs to them, it belongs to them and their culture. And if you use it, you're invading and appropriating it.
Why don't they think of it as you being inspired by it? Like would the post-impressionists, if you did your version of it, think, hey, you're taking my culture.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't they just take it as you being
that is
as a compliment?
People feel.
Huh?
That is the way some people feel. And for me, I was just drawn to it as a patternist like Tony. The Islamic geometrical pattern is built on several overlapping grids, so you can get this kind of spatial complexity, and you could play with that.
That is what I think is the essence of patterns, is that they have multiple readings, and they play directly to your right brain, your pattern recognition brain, the Gestalt brain, and allows you to flex that and exercise that and celebrate that. There's something else I was going to say, but I just I lost it. In terms of cultural appropriation, I think that patterns are more biological than cultural. That it's something that happens everywhere to everybody. They're made everywhere. How can that be somebody's culture? And if it's true what Gombrich proposed in 1974, that patterns are appeal directly to your right brain as opposed to your left brain, then it is a biological phenomenon that everybody needs, everybody does.
You're making me think of a classic Wolfman idea about the painterly and the linear, that artists tend to be either linear or either painterly. And he used that as a definition of the difference between the neoclassical artists and the romantic artists. And so the romantic artists like Delacroix, they would make shape with color, and they were on the whole field of the painting. And the neoclassical artists like Ingres, he once said, hey, anybody can use color. If I do the painting, if I do the drawing, anybody can use the color. And in a sense, the title, Pattern and Decoration, reflects those two kinds of ways of seeing. Does that make sense?
It does. In 1550, the first art historian, whose name was Vasari, thank you, said that there are artists who make their work come to life with design, disegno, which he meant not only design, but anatomy drawing, perspective. And then he said there are artists who make their work come to life with colore. And they're definitely two different kinds of people, and I'm definitely one of the color types. Colors,
That was the Florentines versus the Venetians.
What's that?
The Florentines versus the Venetians.
Right, exactly. The Venetian paintings. Right. His example was Giorgione as a colorist. And I think we're colorists. I think that is the other thing that unites all of us is how much we love it and how much we cherish color, want it, use it.
I'd like to say something about, I love Islamic tradition. The Blue Mosque in Istanbul was so beautiful. I had to sit there for 4 hours just looking at it. But I came in from a different tradition. My father was German pastry chef, so I'm Rococo all the way. And there are 3 branches of the fine arts. There's painting, there's sculpture, and there's pastry making, of which architecture is a sub-branch. And that is not my quote. That's a wonderful quote, and I can't remember his name, from the 16th century. And if you remember, Piazza Navona was carved in butter before it was carved in stone.
That's one of my favorite piazzas.
Yeah, and it was butter to begin with. So I came in through pattern and decoration from working in my father's business and making roses, and I love all the castles and, you know, these castles in Germany and Austria. I would go through them and I couldn't believe them, and they were just so beautiful. And I love looking at beautiful things, and I love making beautiful things. And in the situation we're in this country right now, I'm going to continue making beautiful things because it's a horror what we're living through right now.
Make a lot of pastries at once.
I just I wanted to say something about color. I mean, color is associative, it's emotional, it evokes times of day, times of year, temperature, place, memory, experiences for me. And actually, when I begin working on a piece, I conjure up that stuff to find the color that I need. And I think that decoration, you know, besides the high decoration in cathedrals and mosques, there's the way people make their homes. And then there's the memory that we carry of where we grew up, the homes we grew up in, and that's part of who we are.
Well, between the linear and the painterly, the painterly side of the scale would be mystery. So color is kind of mysterious, and the line is sort of more knowledge in a sense. And I've always felt the difference between craft and art was craft was what you knew how to do. It was repeatable knowledge. And art was mystery. And it's the mystery that an artist has in their life that draws them along. You know, the knowledge kind of is the ego-supportive thing that, yes, I did that, and other people can recognize your capability to have a skill. But if it was only skill, it would just be like academic art, right? You know what the person is going to do next. Whereas if you're on that scale and you edge towards mystery, you can go too far. Then you're insane. If you go too far this way, then you're boring. So you need to go up and down that scale to find the right place that gives you the most amount of mystery and that brings the passion. So I like color for that reason.
You know, Joyce actually touched on something that I think relates directly to what you're talking about, because you were also impacted by the traditions of the Catholic Church and sort of the mystery of those rituals in your work.
Well, and so was Pat.
And so, towards that end, I guess my question is what is the role of memory and nostalgia and sentiment that has impacted your work? How do you move through those emotions through your work? How do you work with them and make them concrete?
You mean historical?
In this case, I mean personal memory and personal sentiment, because one of the most interesting things to me about pattern decoration is that it was using this language of abstraction, but also marrying it with this profound pathos and sentiment that was completely absent in the art world for many decades up until that point.
Well, for me, I realized I completely rebelled against the church for what it had done to me, but then later I realized that I was the oldest of 6 kids in in an industrial town. There weren't any rich people or poor people. I didn't know about that until I came to New York. But I would escape and find peace in serving Mass at 5 o'clock. I would go to 5 o'clock Mass and enjoy that. And somebody pointed out, you were probably influenced by the vigil lights and the candle lighting and the dark space. And all that bouncing around is kind of musical and internally peaceful. So I have that memory. But I also realized not long ago that my idea about what art making and what it is very close to the idea of transubstantiation. You know, it's not like, you know, I'm not using blood, you know, although I have friends that have used blood. So that the idea of making something with just the material reality of life, wood, whatever it is, in my case, paint, wood, gems, and trying to make it be something more than it is as material, reflects that childhood experience with the church. The whole thing about churches in the Catholic religion is their way of getting people back in there. You know, like all the art, all the people that go, a doctor, a lawyer, you know, there's great libraries about law in Italy and Rome, right? But do those lawyers going to Italy go to those? No. They go inside churches. It doesn't matter what religion they are, right? They go inside churches because the art brings them in.
Of course. That's a great answer. Thank you.
Once a Catholic, always a Catholic. You can rebel against it, which I did as well, and you know, but if I smell frankincense, I go into a trance almost. I mean, it's really that powerful.
But non-Catholics can do that too.
Yeah, Buddhists can do that. I like the.
There weren't Catholics when the three wise men were going to the...
No, and Christ wasn't a Catholic either. Right. So, but recently, my last show I did on Pope Joan. I decided to focus on Pope Joan because in Catholicism, women just can't raise to the top at all. And it was a reflection of society. And so I wanted to do homage to Pope Joan as pointing out that women still haven't broken the glass ceiling in most cases. And that was what one of my focuses were.
Was Joan a saint?
No, not Joan of Arc. Pope Joan. There's.
What I'm asking is, your Joan must have been a saint first, and then became pope.
No, you don't have to become a saint before you become a pope. You can have children even in the, you know, Leo and all those guys. I mean, they're nephews. So, but Catholicism was a very big influence, and as much as I've rebelled against the church, and I don't believe in most of the stuff of the church anymore, the rituals, the beauty, you know, I still love going to look at the Sistine ceiling, and I was up on the top in the scaffolding when they were cleaning it, and when you look at it from down below, it looks like there's straight lines. When you're up there, the whole ceiling undulates, and you cannot believe that an artist with this undulating ceiling created straight lines when you're looking up at it. It's amazing. So, yeah, I mean, the church provided art for, you know, centuries, and it was beautiful. And Islamic, too. I mean, I just can't get over some of the beauty. And why can't we, you know, usurp, appropriate, honor all of that stuff? There's no reason why we can't.
So when I was 10, I lived in Rome for a year, and I went to a local, you know, a private school. My sister went to the American school, and I was taken to all these cathedrals because my dad was studying the inside of the dome of St. Peter's. And so we would walk around on these cornices that stuck out. And it was really dangerous. But in fact, it was kind of thrilling to go to all these churches that my dad wanted to look at art and think about it.
Well, there's also the great sexual education that they've provided humanity.
Really?
I just
they
flashed
started
on
at a very
church
young age.
experience. And I'm not Christian, but every time I go to Venice, I go to the same church to see this Giovanni Bellini altarpiece, which is my favorite artwork. And there are not so many people in the churches as there used to be. And one time I went in and I sat down, the church was pretty empty, and I sat right in front of the altarpiece and looked at it, and all of a sudden this mass started, and the church was filled with this music, and I felt like, I think I got it.
You're going to heaven.
Like you're rising up or something.
I have a similar experience in Florence with St. Mark's, the monk place, St. Mark's, and the Fra Angelico is in that building. And every time I go there to Italy, I go and visit that place on purpose. For those of you that don't know, Fra Angelico was a fra, but he also made these paintings in this, what do they call those? It's not a... No, those buildings. The monastery. There you go.
No,
Anyway.
He painted frescoes in every room.
Yes, and you
you
would be in one of these, in their frescoes, and you'd be in one of these little cubicles, and they would be so beautiful because they look like they melted and emerged from the wall like an angel did it or something. And he's called Fra Angelico. But the reason I go back every time is because I look forward to how I'm going to feel this time, because I always get a new realization about the work and the idea of the art every time I go. And so that's become a kind of model for me about how art should function. It should make you, have enough mystery in there to make you want to come back and see how you feel each time. So that's one of my big ones was Italy and with other artists.
I can't believe that a P&D discussion is now all about Catholicism. What happened? But I have my 2 cents. To answer your question of how it was made curved to look straight, now I've lost his name. I wrote a long paper about this Capozzo, and what he did was make a grid out of string and hold it, have the drawing sort of on the string, and hold it up and shine a light through it. He says a lantern or a candle, and project that on the curved surface and trace it on the curve. All technology.
So beautiful.
And then he says there are other machines of your imagination which could help. By which he meant he had a wooden dome of the nave and a little hole in it, and you at a very special place, and you looked up and he had drawings and put them on the inside of the dome and look through that, and then he would take it and adjust it and then put it back and look through that. And that device was available the first time I saw Santa Iglesia of Loyola.
I
Saint
love learning
Ignatius.
new things. I mean, just being with all you guys, I've learned so much on, the last day and a half. I've learned something new from each of you guys every day.
It has been fun that way.
It has been quite fun.
You know.
And it's a pleasure to have you here. I have a million other questions I could ask, but I want to open it up to the audience to see if anyone has any questions for the artists, if anyone wants to follow up on anything we talked about.
We've answered them all.
He wants.
So, I was telling Tracy, you all have had evolving practices. Like, this is really an exhibition and collection. Here's our collector, Bill, of very young, very young minds, trying out new things. I'm wondering, do you ever go back? I mean, I don't, really, with my work. So I'm wondering, how often do you go back to what you do? Or is it sort of, somehow a touchstone, what you see here?
I always go back.
You always go back.
Yeah, I've reworked paintings that have been in museum shows. I'm ashamed to say. I'm sort of the Bonnard of contemporary art. Bonnard used to get himself invited to a collector's house and for dinner or something, and he would sneak off and find his painting, and he had a little kit, and he'd be in there like, I'm not that bad, but no, because if you revisit an idea that you had once before, you come back to it with so many more ideas that you can use with this original version. You've learned so much since then. I've redone my ball strings and balls and things like that, and I've reworked the columns many times, and each time I do, in fact, the thing has a life that contributes to my energy for it. So you ought to try it. Why not?
I can say that I think my career is a pendulum. It swings too far, and oh no, and then I have to go back to the other way. And the swing is between geometry and color, and there are life situations which encourage you to quit and start swinging the other way. But I think it's a natural thing for artists to do.
I think it was a really interesting thing that I had never really thought of about pattern and how basic it is. And you mentioned the right side of the brain, but I think we can go right down to our heart, that the pattern of the beating of the heart is like an immediate one. And I think, Joyce, you had maybe made a comment kind of quickly about, if I understood it right, decoration not being given full credibility. But it's, I think, because decoration covers something foundational, but in fact, pattern for decoration is really so basic and primitive. So it's kind of an ironic thing.
That's my wife. Jody.
So nice you pointed that out.
Yeah. Well, I should, don't you think?
Of course.
Full disclosure.
Yes.
She's a
Yes.
So sort of to take off on what you said, you all clearly have a lot in common and a lot of differentiation. Is it important for you now to still be part of this name, decorative? You mentioned we needed to have a title, we needed to call ourselves something. Is that something now you have pride in, and it's something you still think of as yourselves, or is it a moment?
I think it was a moment. I mean, the show represents that moment. All of us have gone on to do other things since that moment.
Makes sense. I just want to tell you that I was a student in New York, and Louise Bourgeois was a teacher of mine. She totally didn't like me. She loved young men.
Exactly. That's why she said what she was saying.
Since you mentioned you've all gone on to something else, what have you each gone on to?
My work for the last 30-some years has been cartographic, working with maps. And, you know, I have a decorative sensibility, and patterns enter into it sometimes. But it's very different from my early work.
And I had a dog, and I had moved to Shelter Island in 2008, and I would walk him on this beach, and it's about a 2.5-mile walk from one end to the other end and then back. And I would see these stones that blew me out of the water because they looked so kind of traditional, like a female figure, no head, shoulders, waist, hips. And then I found a male torso, which you look at, you go, oh, that's a guy. And so I would kind of walk back to my truck with so many stones. And at a certain point, I couldn't find a stone anywhere. But I began to pick up twigs that had washed up on the beach. And I piled them up on this table. And at a certain point, I went, this is really dangerous. I've got to go through these, and I got to choose what works and what doesn't work. And so I photographed all those twigs. The photographs were at 110 megapixels, so the detail on them kind of blows you out of the water. But then I would take and scan the actual stick, however size it was, and I would cast them in bronze. And at a certain point, a guy who I had met in Bridgehampton said, I have a foundry in Mexico City. And he said, you got to come down, and I'm going to cast this big 8-foot bronze for you. So I went down, and when I saw it, he didn't have a foundry. He scanned all these different pieces, printed them out in bronze, and then he had them welded together by someone who didn't even know that this was copper.
Wow, that's hard.
It was bronze. And so when I went down there, I said, I can't show this because I can see every weld on this project. And so it was sent up, and this woman, what's her name? She's a major collector and supporter of the Museum of Modern Art and da-da-da-da. And she had a show in Massachusetts. And so I sent it there. I was in the gallery talking to friends. And then I thought, you know, I really should go down and look at my piece. And when I went down there, you saw all the wells. And I was like, so I went to this foundry that I use, and I said, who can fix this? And they gave me the name of a woman who wasn't very far from where the show was. And she took it and darkened the whole thing down. But parts of it still glowed. So in the end, it worked out great.
So is this your new style that you emerged to?
I'm sorry?
Well, the original question was about how have you changed since that time in the...
Well, you know, the funny thing is I'm still collecting twigs.
And you still seem to be in the water all the time, getting blown out.
No,
What's
they're
with that?
on the beach.
What's up with that? You said the stone blew you out of the water.
So I moved on from patterns to two-dimensional patterns to three-dimensional patterns, four-dimensional patterns, non-Euclidean patterns, quasi-crystal patterns.
Where are you stopping?
I stopped and have swung back to a different image.
Well, me, I never really knew where I was going, but I have taken what in hindsight looked like logical steps when I first discovered, when I was first making drawings with dots and paint, and I put dots in my drawings, and I thought, these are turning out to be kinesthetically cliched, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, where are there dots in nature, And then I go, oh, stars, like duh. But anyway, so I started collecting imagery of outer space, and then I got involved in the concepts of curvature and so on. So my idea about what painting could be was against the Greenbergian, essentialist idea, which was so popular at the time. Which Greenberg said, because of photography took care of reproduction and representation, then the other art forms had to be what is essentially what they were about. So painting had only to be about painting and flatness and color and so on, but it shouldn't have imagery and everything. And I hated that, which is one of the things that I identified with the pattern and decoration for, because they were like against that too, right? So I started to align the concept I was discovering about outer space, curvature, etc., with a concept of space and the possibility of making a different kind of space in painting. And then what happened was one thing led to another, and there isn't what you could say a big change in the end. This is where I've come on the journey so far, and you can pretty much see the steps if you were to look at it.
I think there's a germ of something that runs through the work. I'm very emotional. I work a lot from my heart. And I did a series about their dresses, their tiny dresses. I call them christening dresses because I was raised Catholic. But the dresses look very beautiful, but they have names, and they're about abortion, about losing a child, miscarriage, like Modigliano's mistress committed suicide when she was with his child. And my grandmother had 10 children, and 6 of them died. And so I think about what women went through and still go through. And Barbara Zucker did that wonderful show on abortion that was in Brooklyn, and it was completely ignored. And it was like before this Roe versus Wade was repealed, and it was so important. I wish the show could be restructured again, but my stuff still comes from a very emotional part. As I'm getting closer to my dirt nap, I'm thinking less about death, actually, and more just about making beautiful things, and not so impacted with the emotional content that I've had for my whole life.
Well, I think we could all use a little bit more beauty in the world, especially these days. Thank you, everyone, so much. Pat, John, Tony, Ned, Joyce, thank you so much for joining us. It's been such a pleasure.